recovery. I am so grateful. And as I say all the time, almost everything good in my life I have is because of recovery. Because recovery restored me into a healthy relationship with Jesus. And he's working on a healthy relationship with myself and a healthy relationship with others. And the ones I don't have a healthy relationship with, it's the only hope I have of having a healthy relationship with them. So this is a special night. It's a very special night for me. As we'll bring a friend up here in just a minute. But I want to kick it off as we got 2 or 3 more weeks left in this time where we're talking about what? What are we going to talk about? 3 letters? Sex. By the way, y'all be proud to know, Seth preached the same message this morning in church, in big church, as we used to call it, and he didn't pull any punches. He talked about the truth of Christ. I pulled something from Greg's website, which is with Awaken Ministries. I'll introduce him in a moment. And this meant something to me this week, Greg, as I read it. Because you're going to hear Greg's story here in a few minutes, and you're going to hear, but you're also going to hear what is the solution? What is the solution? How do we come out of this brokenness? And I love this, that Jesus doesn't use his perfection to rub my face in my imperfection. Boy, we can have invitation on that. Here's what he does do. He sympathizes with what it's like to be weak, like we are. He understands what we go through because he's been there. He sits at the right hand of God the Father, and when our enemy shows up to accuse us of all the horrible things we've done, Jesus defends us to the Father as righteous because we are righteous because of what he did on the cross. And by rising from the dead, from his exalted position, he gives us mercy and grace when we need it, which is every single day. Isn't that awesome? That is so awesome. So with that, a friend of mine, Greg, I guess we met, I don't know, 7 years ago, 6.5 years ago, actually came and spoke at Rainbow Presbyterian Church. We went to hear him. It was a talk on pornography and all, and I don't know if you know much about Rainbow Presbyterian Church, and you know, there's a lot of older people there. I know I'm an old person. A lot of people about my age there, you know, and older. I mean, you had people 75 and 80 years. I mean, it was packed. I mean, it was a lot. It was a men's ministry thing. We went, and literally, you could hear a pin drop in there with these guys as he was telling his story, and it resonated with people. And then Greg and I connected after that. I was interested in his ministry. It's a 12-step program. It's called Awaken, and it's about freedom. You know, he's going to talk some about his story and his brokenness, but he's also going to lead us to that solution, which is our wholeness in Christ, and it's a beautiful thing. So I'd just like to bring my friend up, Greg Oliver from Awaken Ministries. Let's give him a hand.
Thank you, Lane. Hey, everybody. My name's Greg, and I'm a grateful believer in recovery for 15 years from porn and sexual addiction. Good to be with y'all tonight. Going to be talking a little bit about some of the answers that I've discovered along the way in my own recovery, but this is a song more about some of the questions we have at the start. I know I'll get an answer that I won't understand if I ask that your intentions be made clear. I heard your plans are greater, and in that greater plan lie the reasons why This story would be different if it were only mine to write. There are secrets I would never volunteer. But secrets lose their power when they have no place to hide. Maybe that is why you brought me here. Oh, I hope you know what you're doing. You brought me here. Well, it's a mess of my own making, I fully realize. And the consequences shake my heart with fear. But if I was happy with the way things were, then I'd put up a fight. Guess I'm grateful that you brought me here. And oh, all I see are the ruins, but oh, when the smoke starts to clear, hey, I trust you know what you're doing. You brought me here. And if it's hard to raise a white flag, then it's harder to believe that surrendering is worth the sacrifice. 'Cause the very thing I always feared would be the death of me was a way to come alive. And it hurts to be so broken, but it's bearable somehow, as the grounds to prove I'm worthy disappear. I always heard you love me, but I think I know it now. It's the reason why you brought me here. Oh, love's the reason why you brought me here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for having us. We're really excited to be here. Lane, thanks for reading. I don't know where you went, but okay, yeah, there you are, front row, last place I looked. Thanks for reading that. That was a long time ago. I'm like, man, I should have just read that. That's some good stuff. My name's Greg Oliver, and for the last 9 years, my wife Stacy and I, Stacy's right there on the second row, have led a ministry that we started back in 2015 called Awaken. It's coming out of my own experience. For 15 years, I've been in recovery. For about 15 years before that, I served in pastoral ministry as a music and worship pastor. That entire time, and even before that, struggling with hidden, secret, addictive, sexual behavior that just escalated over the years. I don't know if there's anybody in the room who knows what that's like. But living a double life is a hard and a miserable thing to do. And God, in His goodness, brought it out into the light in January of 2009. And it was the worst and the best day of my life. Some of y'all probably know what that's like, to have both of those happening at the same time. I'll tell you a little bit more about my story in just a few minutes. As we're getting started, just want to let you know that I so appreciate and am grateful for what Catalyst is doing with recovery. It makes me just want to jump up and down and celebrate when a church will prioritize recovery from substance and process addiction, from trauma, all the things that keep us stuck in life, when a church will prioritize helping people get the type of freedom and help and recovery that they need. And so it's just a real blessing to get to be here. And it's a blessing to get to share in a space where we're offering the same kind of help and solutions for people. Awaken specializes in the area of sexual addiction and sexual betrayal trauma, not because we think that it is any more destructive than other kinds of addiction, but just because that's our story, that's what we know. And so we've kind of chosen a narrow lane. Some of you, I know in the room, are aware of this, but we have multiple meetings for men all over central Alabama, including one on Thursday nights right here in Gadsden. If you want more information on that, if you like additional meetings, there's a few things over on the welcome table that I've put out for anybody who's interested. There's a flyer where you can see how to contact us to get information on our meetings. We've got some virtual, some in person. And then we've got a retreat and a workshop for men who are in recovery from sexual brokenness and women who are recovering from sexual betrayal trauma, having a partner who is the one who struggles with the compulsive addictive behavior, called the Roots Retreat. We offer those about 4 times a year each, and there's information on that as well. And also, something that's new that we've just started doing in the last 3 months or so is a podcast. It's called What We Really Want, and there's some little square cards where you can just scan that QR code and you can listen and follow. The thing about the podcast is it's called What We Really Want because, I don't know about you all, but a lot of the messages that I have been exposed to, a lot of the books and the resources that I've read since I've been in recovery for 15 years, have often been focused on how to not do the thing that you've been doing, right? How to not look at porn, or how to not take drugs, or how to not drink to excess. And that's great. I mean, because sobriety is important, and learning how to walk away from that behavior is important. But I think a lot of times, the resources and the things that I've read fail to address that there's something underneath the behavior. And if we only look at the behavior, we're not looking at the whole picture. And when we're going to a process or a substance that we know is hurting us, right? We've gotten past the point of thinking this is doing something good for me. At first it was like that, but now the destructive impact is such that I know that I want to stop, and I would if I could. So why do we keep going back to it? And why did we start going to it in the first place? It's because there is a deep desire down in our hearts, in our spirits, that's a good desire that we didn't know how to pursue the right thing to get that need met or that desire fulfilled. And so we chose this. And we look in our stories and we find that there's a lot of reasons why we did it, and then it got out of control. And so with the podcast, what we've decided to do is, rather than just be another show on how to not do this or how to not do that, it's about how can we encourage people to discover what is it that you really want for yourself. What is it that your soul desires? What is the deep desire that's not being met? How could you find and come to a place where you have a vision for what you want in your life, which I think ultimately, if you were to boil it down to one word, it would be connection. I think we're all looking to know and be known, to see and be seen. And so the show is not just about tactics. It's not primarily about tactics. It's not primarily about sex addiction, even though that's what Awaken does first and foremost. It's a show about giving people a picture of what it would look like to pursue healthy experiences with connection. And so it's for everybody. And we hope that you'll listen to it, and if it's an encouragement to you, hope you'll tell your friends about it. It's been really fun. It's been great. A lot of people who have been sort of heroes of mine and have been influential in my recovery have been guests on it, and so it's been a joy. So I want to tell you about a guy named Vincent Felitti. Vincent Felitti was a medical doctor, and he was the head of Kaiser Permanente's Department of Preventative Medicine in San Diego in the 1980s. And he was involved in research on food addiction and obesity. And during the research that they did on this, his team discovered that a majority of the patients that were in their research were survivors of childhood sexual trauma. And he noticed this correlation, and he decided that this deserves more research. And so later, he did exactly that. He conducted research into the many types of trauma that people experience during childhood, and that has come to be known as adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs. Have y'all ever heard of ACEs? If you've done some therapy work, you might have had a therapist who encouraged you to get involved or to become aware of some of the ACEs that you had. These could include physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, physical or emotional neglect, exposure to domestic violence, household substance abuse, household mental illness, parental separation or divorce, incarcerated household member. And we're like, shoot, is there anybody that didn't have ACEs? And the answer is no. All of us carry trauma. If you ever meet a person that says, I've never had any trauma, they just aren't aware of their trauma. They're thinking about something else that they didn't experience. But a lot of times the tricky part about trauma is it's so subtle because it's something that we live with every day. What about emotional neglect, right? You just get used to that and it becomes your normal. So in the aftermath of this research, Felitti was convinced that much unhealthy behavior that eventually turns into addiction is directly connected to unresolved, unhealed childhood trauma. And when seeking to explain why do people keep going back to it again and again, despite getting to the point where the negative consequences have brought into their lives, this is what he said. It's profound. He said, it's hard to get enough of something that almost works. Think about that. It's hard to get enough of something that almost works. Now, what does that bring up inside you when you hear it? I heard a lot of response, so I'm making up that it resonates with some of you. That when you heard those words, it connected with something that you felt, something that you've experienced. I mean, if you continue to go back to addictive behaviors, even after you knew for a fact that they weren't giving you what they'd promised. Some of you might be thinking, but it didn't almost work. I mean, it didn't work at all. It created this huge mess in my life, right? And I get that sentiment. Gathered here tonight at this meeting, it's pretty clear that our current perspective is that what we tried didn't work, right? But the truth is, it worked until it didn't, right? The things that we used to try to use to take care of ourselves and to make sense of our pain, our trauma, our fear, our confusion, they did almost work. And so otherwise, we wouldn't have kept going back to them again and again for years. And so I want to talk some, after I pause for a minute to tell how this looked in my life with my story, to talk about these things that almost work and how we can find what actually does work. Does that sound good? Okay. Lane, I may need you to give me like a heads up when I got 10 minutes to go or something like that. I'm going to try to make good use of the time. So this week, I'll turn 54 years old. And so I was born in 1970. I grew up as a child of the 70s and the 80s. And I grew up in a Christian home. Both my parents were believers by the time I was born. And I grew up in a very, very conservative, some would say fundamental type of church upbringing. Anybody grew up in a similar surrounding than that? One of the things about growing up in conservative fundamental Christianity is a lot of the evaluation of how you were doing as a Christian was based on what? Performance. I think I heard that word, right? Absolutely. Absolutely. There's a phrase that I've heard a lot, and it's performance-based acceptance. I don't know if any of y'all have ever heard that, but that was really, that was the environment where I spent much of my life growing up. Now, I didn't have any alcoholic or drug-addicted parents. I didn't have a divorce in my home. I didn't have anyone incarcerated in my home. A lot of these ACEs that I read, I didn't have. But what I did have is some of the emotional neglect and some of the things that really contributed to me carrying a lot of anxiety and a lot of stress that I didn't really know what to do with. I know that whenever I would do something that made my parents happy or made people at church happy or made my teachers at Christian school happy, I would hear, Greg, I'm so proud of you. And every time I did something that was wrong, I would hear, Greg, I'm so disappointed in you, right? Maybe not every time, but that was a consistent thing. And I don't know if y'all know this, but as a kid, we don't know how to differentiate between the things that I'm doing and my value as a person. kids are very egocentric and the world revolves around us. So if something good happens, look what I did. And if something bad happens, hey, it's my fault. And so what I learned to distill down was when I did something that made the caregivers in my life proud, then I was a source of pride. But when I failed, then I was a huge disappointment. There wasn't the distinction made between me and my behaviors. Does that make sense? And I think it's really important that we distinguish between our identity and our behaviors, but that wasn't something that I learned how to do. And so as a kid, I tried so hard to always do the right thing. Like I really did try and wanted to do the right thing. And when I didn't do the right thing, I desperately tried to make sure nobody ever found out about it. So I would hide or I would lie. I would conceal anything that I did that wasn't good. And so that created a lot of fear. It created a lot of tension. It created a lot of stress. And I, as a person, am not built to carry that much around for very long before I got to do something with it. Anybody know what that feels like? And so the release for me when I was a kid was I would escape. And I would escape into TV and reading books, just anything that was a story. I would escape into a story and just try to get lost out of my reality into another reality, because that would just make me forget about the things that were stressing me out. And I didn't realize that I was using escape as a strategy to try to soothe myself, calm myself, meet my own needs, right? Because I didn't know of anyone that I could say, I need help with this, and so I figured out a way to do it myself. Anybody else ever figured out a way to do it yourself, right? When I hit puberty, then I discovered a new way to employ my strategy, because I discovered that masturbation, man, that will really relieve stress while you're doing it. And yet it would always increase my stress because I didn't want anybody to know that that's something I was doing, because that was against the rules. That was something I was taught that Christians don't do. I was even taught that's something that God is angry with me when I did it. And so, I didn't know what to do with that, because I had discovered this pill that'll cure all that ails me, right? And so I just figured the best thing to do is just try to conceal it, keep anybody from finding out, and then just hang on, don't do anything worse than that until I'm old enough to get married. And then when I can get married and I can have a wife and we can have sex all the time, then I'll never struggle again. Right. I don't even need the laugh track for that. Y'all know how ridiculous that is, and yet it's the lie that everybody that I talk to in our community has believed, because we think that sex is our solution, or that a lack of it is our problem. That wasn't my problem. My problem was I didn't know how to be vulnerable and to believe that it would be safe. I didn't know how to share what I needed, what I felt, what I was afraid of. I just had to stuff it down, and I couldn't stuff it down for too long before I would have to release that pressure. And I'd learned how to do it, and nobody yelled at me or frowned at me when I did it, as long as I didn't get caught, and so that's what I'll do. So I carried this belief that sexual release was going to fix all my problems into marriage. But it's okay, because I was really old and mature when I got married. I was 21 whole years old. And my wife was 20. So we were combined 41 years, which is almost old enough to know better, right? And so we got married, and we didn't know that we were two little kids who were acting like adults, and found out very quickly that being able to have sex as a married couple doesn't fix anything. Because sex isn't meant to fix anything. It's meant to be something that is an expression of intimacy and trust and vulnerability that's already there. And it wasn't there, because I didn't know how to be vulnerable. Being vulnerable was terrifying to me, right? Because vulnerability felt like exposure, and that felt like a bad thing. Because whenever I'm exposed, something bad happens. And so if I were to tell my girlfriend, then fiance, then wife, that I've been struggling with masturbation and pornography for that long, then she would break up with me, or never trust me, or freak out, and I just couldn't let that happen. Another thing that addicts do is think that we're in control, right? So I couldn't let that happen. And so I kept that secret into marriage. About a year into marriage, Stacy came home to our apartment, and I was in the shower, and she heard what I was doing in there, and it devastated her. it was as if she had walked in and caught me in bed with someone, because she had no box for that being something that I would do. And so from that point on, now that was something that I was directly lying to her about. And now I'm in ministry. Now I'm trying to lead other people, disciple other people, be a worship. And the first church was a worship and youth pastor, which please don't combine those. It's just not nice to do to a person. But I was the youth pastor and the worship pastor, and trying to hold things together. I was 24 years old, and it just escalated. And then came 1996, and lo and behold, I got a computer with internet. And we were off to the races, right? It amplified and escalated quickly, right? Porn became something that I not only looked at every once in a while, but every day. Sitting in my church office on that little dial-up modem, waiting a minute and a half for a picture to load, but I would just get in the zone, and I would lose a whole afternoon. And so I was getting deeper and deeper and deeper into it, keeping the secret from everyone, including Stacy. Just thinking, I'm going to have to figure out how to get a handle on this, how to control it, how to stave it off. And I tried, and I read books, and I would look at resources, and nothing worked. And the thing about addiction is it's always moving in one direction or the other. Addiction never plateaus. It never gets static. It's never in a holding pattern. I'm either getting deeper in it or I'm recovering from it, right? And so because I wasn't getting help, because I wasn't asking for help, it was getting worse and worse and worse because of the law of diminishing returns, right? After a while, it takes more of something to give you that same sense of what it was doing for you, right? Because it almost works. Hard to get enough of something that almost works, because the amount that almost worked before doesn't even register after a while. So I have to do more and more. And so over the years, I would cross one line after another, and sooner or later, they became lines that I swore I'd never cross. Oh, shoot. Well, okay, well, at least I won't cross that one, and then I did. Well, at least I won't cross that big one, what we call the flesh barrier. And then in the fall of 2002, I did that one too for the first time, and it wasn't the last. For the next 6+ years, I kept going back over and over again. It was never relational. It was always anonymous kind of hookups, because here's the weird thing, and some of y'all will identify with this. I was an addict. I was doing things that were directly betraying and harming my wife, and yet I loved my wife. Always loved my wife. Didn't want her to be hurt. Justified lying and hiding from her because if she knew, it would hurt her. And I didn't want her to be hurt. And they would say, well, then you might want to quit doing what you're doing, you know? And I did want to quit doing what I was doing, but I couldn't, because it had taken over. The thing that had helped me was now harming me, and now my brain was hijacked, and I couldn't walk away. Because in order to walk away, you got to have help. To get help, you have to ask for it to get caught. And I know I wasn't going to ask for it. And God knew that too, because in January of 2009, he said, I've had enough of you destroying yourself. I love you too much to let this go on any further. And so he stepped in, and he caused me to get exposed, and it was awful, and it was wonderful. I lost my job, lost everything that I had that was familiar in my life, and yet what I got as a 38-year-old at the time was a life where all of a sudden I didn't need to check my story anymore. I remember Stacy asking me a question. It was a silly question. I don't even remember what it was about. But when I answered it, I thought something, and I kind of was smiling. She said, why are you smiling? I said, I think that's the first time that I have ever answered a question without thinking, how do I need to answer this question? Without thinking about the lie that I had to not contradict or the plan that I had to not mess up. Because there weren't any secrets anymore. And it was free. Like I had talked about freedom, I'd heard about freedom, but now I was actually getting to experience freedom. Now, I was in a crater, you know, I was jobless in 2009. Anybody remember what the job market was like back then? So I'd been at a church, very, well compensated, for 11 years, and now I'm looking for a job, and the only thing I know how to do is the thing I can't do. So I worked at Chick-fil-A for a while. I worked at Regions Bank for a while. I sold cars for a while. And through all of that time, I was working recovery. I was going to counseling. I was learning about how the things in my life and my past had affected my present, and how I could see a change in my future by asking for help from others, and most particularly from God, who I'd been afraid to ask for help from because he was the one who all this time knew all of it, right? And I knew that he knew, and I knew that technically if I confessed it, he had to forgive it because those are his rules, right? But I felt so far from him. I felt like if I died in my addiction, I would go to heaven and he would be really ticked off to have to let me in, because if there's any loophole where he could exclude me, he would do it. But he's a God of his word, and so I would technically squeak in, but he wouldn't be happy about it. Like, that's what I believed about God. Now, you think that was maybe influenced by some of the people in my life who represented God to me earlier on? Maybe so. But now I was able to actually pursue God, to know that all of this time, he was not interested in punishing me, in smacking me down. He was interested in helping me and giving me the life that he had created for me to live. John 10:10 says that the enemy comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and have it to the fullest. So right there, you see evil and good's strategies in one verse. And I had been bought in, at first voluntarily and then involuntarily, to the enemy's plan, and now I was getting to experience Jesus's, which was amazing. So, coming back to the whole thing of it's hard to get enough of what almost works, I think an important question to answer is, how did it almost work for me? How does it almost work for all of us? I think addictive behaviors, whether it's drugs, alcohol, gambling, disordered eating, shopping, or sex, always are attempts to correct the trauma that we carry in two ways: what it provides us with and what it protects us from. So the addiction gives me something and it protects me from something. At least I believe that it does. And I think it does to an extent, but just not what I need. So what does addiction provide us with? Escape. We get away from the painful feelings. Relief. We experience something that feels better. And numbing. Numbing is ultimately when we don't feel anything, right? What does addiction protect us from? Fear, feeling that we're out of control. Anger, the feeling of injustices that haunt us. Shame, the feeling that the bad things are my fault. If you're really wanting to strip it down to one word, what does the addiction protect me from? Is pain. I don't like pain. Does anybody like pain? I don't like it. But I believe that we actually need more than what addiction provides us with and what it protects us from. It almost works, but it fails to give us what we actually need. Now, when it comes to sexual addiction, I believe that the things, because I said earlier that I think if we were to boil down what we really want to one word, it would be connection. Another way to put that is intimacy. Sexual addiction is known as an intimacy disorder. We are looking to get our connections needs met in sexual ways, but the way that we do it in addiction is in isolation. It's by myself at home with a device or with a person with whom I have no covenant relationship, and so it's objectified even though it's with a live human, right? So there's intimacy counterfeit because there's no real intimacy, right? So the solutions are always short term, no matter what the addiction is. Kind of like the quenching of thirst that Jesus talked about to the woman at the well in John 4. Lane told me he talked about this just a few weeks ago. Jesus told her that everyone who drank that water would eventually be thirsty again. He was helping her, and I think us, to see that there are things that can be good. We can have a good relationship with sex. I believe that many people can have a good relationship with prescription drugs and not abuse them. A lot of people have experienced having a healthy relationship with alcohol. They've never abused it, right? But it's an attempt. It's when we are trying to use those things to provide for us what we need that comes from somewhere else, that's when we start having an unhealthy relationship with those things, right? And so they're never going to provide the thing that we're really looking for. So if that's what it gives us, escape, relief, numbing, protection from pain, what does it almost provide us with? Addiction almost, but doesn't really provide us with resilience. How's resilience better than escape? Well, when we escape, it's because we assume that the feelings that we have are bad or negative, that it can't be good to experience them. If I think pain is bad, if I think sadness is bad, I'm going to try to avoid it. But if I realize that there are no bad emotions, there are some unpleasant ones, but every time I feel sadness, I'm feeling something that Jesus felt. When I feel fear, I'm feeling something that Jesus felt. Read about his experience in the Garden of Gethsemane. But resilience helps us to experience the ability to sit in those difficult feelings because we know we're not alone and that those feelings can't and won't destroy us. Addiction offers temporary escape, but when we escape, we rob ourselves of the ability to mature, to grow, and to become more resilient. James says that we're to count it joy when we encounter trials of many kinds because the testing of our faith produces endurance. Another thing that addiction doesn't provide us with is peace. How's peace better than relief? Well, when we seek relief through acting out, it's because we want to feel something better than the pain. And relief can feel an awful lot like peace, except that it's temporary. It doesn't last. As soon as we sober up, come off the high, or experience sexual climax, the pain that we were seeking relief from floods right back in. Only now, is it better or is it worse? Exactly. Addiction offers relief, but it's short-lived and it robs us of our opportunity to turn to the Lord to find real peace. In the letter to Philippians, Paul says that when we come to the Lord with our requests, that he gives us the peace that transcends understanding. Peace that doesn't make sense with our circumstances, but we can't find that if we're in the fog of addiction. It also doesn't provide us with a true experience with our feelings. How is feeling better than numbing? Because when we numb out, we suppress our emotions. And it makes sense why we would want to do that when the emotions feel unpleasant. But suppressing them keeps us stuck in this state of wounding so that it can never heal. And if we have a painful physical wound, but all we do is take Vicodin rather than dressing and treating the wound, which can temporarily actually cause more pain, the wound won't heal. It'll get worse. It'll get infected. See, addiction offers a short-term way to turn off our emotions, but it robs us of the chance to heal as we experience the full range of emotions, which is a huge part of how we reflect the image of God. And so all these things, resilience, peace, and feeling the full range of our emotions are ways we begin to move through life experiencing healthy connection to God, to ourselves, and to the people in our lives. So real quick, going back to John 4. How am I doing on time? Okay? Remember that Jesus offered living water. He told the woman at the well that it would quench the ultimate thirst forever. Imagine a life where rather than surviving from one fix to the next, or from one sexual experience or one porn binge to the next, you could actually experience lasting, real healing, living connected rather than isolated. So many young men that I talk to, because we have a lot of young single men who come to Awaken, and they have been using porn and masturbation to soothe and to meet their needs ever since they can remember. And the vast majority of them found porn years before their bodies even sexually matured. And so they have zero experience with masturbation that doesn't also involve pornography. And some of them are conditioned to the point where they can't get to sleep at night unless they masturbate to orgasm. And they get that serotonin and prolactin shot in their brain that helps them go to sleep. What would it be like to actually live connected, experiencing some of the things that sexual or other type of addictive behavior offers us to where we didn't eventually need to go back to those? John 4 is a vivid picture of the difference between what we've all done, going back over and over and over again to what almost works, and what Jesus offers to do for us and in us as he heals those wounds of our trauma and teaches us better ways to live in the present and to live connected. Okay, so everything I've been talking about helps us make sense of why we keep going back, because they almost worked. These behaviors gave us a glimpse. They gave us a taste of what we were really looking for, right? I mean, if they didn't, we wouldn't have gotten hooked. Is that fair? Okay. But what they did is they gave us a glimpse and a taste without requiring us to be vulnerable or risk further pain. And vulnerability and risk are the only ways that we can actually truly connect to God, to ourselves, and to other people around us. And when we started, and what started as an attempt to care for ourselves, ended up with our brains and our bodies getting hijacked And eventually something that we chose to do became something that we could not choose not to do without help. The question I want to ask as I'm finishing up here, though, is what happens when we stop going back to what almost works? And how do we do that? Well, not alone. I can tell you that. That's square one. We have to ask for help. Is asking for help one of the most terrifying things when you've been living with an addiction or living with a secret? I know that was the terrifying thing for me because I did not know how others would respond. I didn't know what would happen to my marriage. I was pretty sure I knew what would happen to my job. But what I believed was, here's what I believed. Stacy won't divorce me because she has such a conviction about not divorcing, but I will doom her to a miserable life forever. And I'll lose all my friends, and I'll lose my reputation, and I'll never get to serve God again, all those things. And I was not willing to put myself in that vulnerable place to risk it. And so God did it for me. But when we do that, it allows us to actually connect first with a power greater than ourselves. Amen? When we stop trying to meet our own needs, when we examine why trusting God is so difficult. And why is trusting God so difficult? There's a lot of ways you can answer that question. For me, one of the primary reasons why trusting God was so difficult was because a lot of the people in my life who had represented God to me didn't do a really great job of representing God. God is like this or God is like that. And God wasn't like that. God wasn't angry. God wasn't harsh. And so I was pretty hesitant to really trust him, because if that's what he's like, then I don't know how this is going to go. But when we become ready to accept what God offers to provide in the way that we read about in step 2, when we come to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, then we see amazing things happen. Instead of going back to what almost works, we begin to learn how to believe that Jesus actually offers us something that will quench the thirst and provide what we really need. We also can come to realize that we don't have to be protected from pain. Now, that's a scary one. Jesus does protect us from being overwhelmed by pain or being destroyed by pain, but he does not protect us from pain. Can anybody say amen to that? Anybody still feeling pain as you're recovering? Right? But what is the thing that we fear the most about pain is that it's going to be too much, that it's going to be overwhelming, that I'm not going to be able to handle it. And Jesus won't let that happen to his children. He is there in it with us. Yes, pain is unpleasant, but it's where we learn so much about ourselves and about God, and it's the place that ultimately results in true healing. There's nothing quick or easy about it. And the healing will continue on a bumpy path. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, right? Progress, not perfection, until Jesus returns. But what it allows us to experience in this life is something we read about in the Serenity Prayer, right? Reasonable happiness in this life as we prepare for supreme happiness forever with him in the next. So my prayer for you, for me, for all of us, is that we're going to come to understand more and more every day that we have a friend, we have a companion, we have a Savior who loves us fiercely, right in the midst of all the things that we've done. Alcoholism, drug addiction, disordered eating, pornography addiction, sexual addiction, you name it, who wants us to know and believe that his love can change us and give us everything we need and everything that works. You have time for me to do one more song? Okay. I want to sing a song for you, and as I sing it, I want to just invite you to receive it as a message coming from Jesus. You can't help but lose your temper. The fuse is short and frayed. You're running out of mercy. I've seen your true heart reaching for the stars and somehow pulling them in. But on your worst day, you're only reaching your end. So you won't look out your window. It's darkened by your shame. So you can't see the light surrounding your worst day. But I've seen your true heart reaching for the stars and somehow pulling them in. But on your worst day, you're only reaching your end. So you don't have to fear your failures or hide the mess you've made. I'm crazy in love with you on your worst day. Yes, I am crazy in love with you on your worst day. Amen.
Thank you, Greg. If you'll just stay up here just for a moment. I don't know about y'all, but if it's sexual addiction you haven't really struggled with, I mean, if it's like the heart of your struggle, but it's been part of your struggle, and it has for most people. But if nothing else, what we do know is, and all of us, we are, I believe, intimately broken. I think that's the best way, right? We're just broken in this intimacy. And so much resonated with me tonight because, boy, especially that performance-based love, I will love if. I will be loved if. And I can carry that weight through me. And the song he sang, and I wish the words would even be projected, because when you got to that part when he says, I loved you anyway, that makes me want to cry. Because I don't have a context for that. I don't have a context for that kind of love. You love me in spite of. And how many of us desperately need that? I mean, I know I do. And I remember, I remember really when the first time I felt that is when I came into a meeting like this. Really. And I sat around and realized, you're not judging me for what I have done and what right? You're not judging me. And you know what? My story's bad, but yours is pretty bad too. Yours is bad too. Now, it didn't get me out of my fetal position, but but the thing is, we don't want people to stay there. And that's what I love, what Greg and his ministry has done. It's not about getting people there and you get around and you tell your sob stories, and having gone to see their model. I was wanting to even see their whole model, which is very much modeled the way we do around a Christ-based 12-centered program, and getting into honest small groups, et cetera, and then growing in Christ. It made me realize, there is a solution. And that's what we always have to, there is a solution. And we never want anybody to leave with that. So before Greg steps down, what I'd just like to say tonight, and is there just any questions anybody has for Greg, whether it be about the ministry, his experience with addiction. If you ask this question, that doesn't mean you're involved in any kind of sexual addiction, by the way. But
if you are, we're okay with that.
yeah, well, you're okay with that.
Yep. Yeah, we got one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Stacy,
I would like to invite Stacy to come up and take this one.
will you give Stacy a hand? The biggest hand to give Stacy is that she stayed with Greg. Okay.
Truth.
Oh, geez, I breathed inside of the microphone. I was kind of hoping this wouldn't have happened, but I appreciate your question because I would say that God is ultimately the answer. He's right. I would not have divorced him, but not because, divorce is, God he's divorced and that's it. Because I have come to understand there's a whole lot more to that. God doesn't like divorce, but he also loves his people more than the institution of marriage. And sometimes the husband doesn't do the work, he doesn't recover, and she's left with some hard decisions. So I am not judgmental on that at all, ever. But I think I would have stayed and just been miserable, honestly. But he did the work, and I think out of a lot of codependency, and we had a good reputation before because I worked really hard to make us look good. And so he kind of threw it, away, and so I had to fix it. So I was going to look really good, standing beside him, forgive him, and all of that. And then after a while, I kind of got in touch with my anger.
You found your anger.
And I will tell you that his nickname was FB, and you can figure out for yourself what those letters
Which
stand
stood for effing someone whose parents were never married.
I didn't cuss. I'm a missionary kid and
You
grew
figured
up
that
in
out.
a very strict environment, just like Greg did, and I did not cuss. I think I knew shit, and that was it.
We are live streaming.
Oh, sorry. See, I'm not perfect, see?
That's it.
So I think just a combination of, God, what do you have? Like, it was awful. It was horrible. It is the worst I have ever gone through in my life. I would say that I don't think I've ever gone through anything really hard until this. I moved to Africa when I was 9, but I'm learning now that that was very traumatic. Like, at the time, it was hard, but I had a great upbringing. I loved being on the mission field. I'm very grateful for the way I was brought up, but I know now that, like, there's so much trauma that came with that, and I'm unpacking that over the last 15 years. But I think for me, seeing him do the work is a big part of why I stayed, because he was repentant and broken, and we were rebuilding a marriage. Like, the first one was dead. We didn't want that first one, is how we look at it. We have a second marriage without a divorce, and just rebuilding our whole relationship.
We had a 17-year phase 1, and we're now 15 years into phase 2.
Yeah. I was your classic codependent. A friend, I guess I call her a friend, said that I was a poster child, is that the phrase, for codependency, because I hit, like, all of the things. And I'm just learning to not do that anymore, to not live like that.
Can I say something,
You
too?
can.
You've heard both of us talk about how the other one did their work. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah.
When she's doing her work, it made it a lot easier for me to feel tethered and not, conflicted, but not everybody has that, right? So some of y'all may be in a relationship where you're wanting to do the work, but your partner's not. And so I don't want to not say that we see you, we understand, we empathize with you. That's one of the reasons why, whether you're the one seeking recovery from the thing that you did or the one seeking recovery from the trauma, asking for help is critical step number 1. Because trying to recover from trauma without community, could you have done it?
No. Well, and I was the person who would have said, or I did say, I'm not going to a meeting. I don't need a meeting. I don't need the 12 steps. That's for addicts. That's for those people. And I'm sorry that I said that, but I did. And then after about 3 months, I was like, F it, this isn't working, because I wasn't doing anything. Except we saw our counselor, and he's getting better. You know, our life's in a crater, like you said. I'm in the heap. He calls it, what do you say, like the dump truck?
The dump truck of all that I've been carrying emptied, and it made me feel a lot of relief, but she
Yeah.
was standing right behind it. So,
You know, and I'm like, oh, you're so free. I'm so happy for you, you know, and all
so
the,
she was pretty annoyed at
I
how
was very
excited
annoyed
I
and
was.
very angry. And I would say, for me, if I didn't have the anger that I had and spew it out, it was ugly. It was ugly. I just don't know that I could be where I am, because I tried to not do that for a while because I wanted to be that good. Whatever, it is not good. I think it's not good to hide how we're feeling. I think just getting that out, and then after however much time, when I was like, this isn't working, I'll go to one of those stupid meetings. There was no meeting. I called a lady. I had to call
One-on-one.
one person. I was like, I'm not calling her. She's a wife of a sex addict. I'm not talking to her. And I finally said, F it, I'll call her. And she brings out the codependency book, and I'm like, what is this garbage, you know? And I start reading it, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm everything in this book. But it was freeing because I don't have to live like this anymore. I don't have to look for people's approval. I can leave here tonight. I don't think y'all won't like me or will not like me because I've swore, but some people can't handle me. And I don't have friends anymore that I had a long time ago. They're not my friends anymore. And I don't really care, honestly. I mean, I'm sad about that, but, like, I don't care. So I think just living that way is how I've learned to live in freedom. Because I was exhausted trying to get people's approval. And it's not the same as addiction. I would not say that I was in the same spot as what he describes he was in, but it was exhausting. And it almost worked because I felt good for a little bit. You know, like, oh, I do matter. Oh, I am important. And then I felt like doo-doo, self-control, you know, when I went home and was by myself with my kids. So I would say doing my own work, him doing his work, and then, and even just last summer we did a marriage intensive, and it was life-changing, 15 years into recovery. So we keep doing the work.
Yeah, I found that I had kind of gotten stale because in the absence of a crisis, I kind of felt like we're fine. Like, if we're not bad, we're good, but we can always be getting closer. And so we took a sabbatical last summer and did a marriage intensive, and it's been amazing to continue doing work without the chaos of recent addiction being right there on the burner.
There's one question, sorry.
Anybody else, anything?
Just wait.
I do know they're going to be over here in the corner if you want to come over and talk at all. And again, it's first time I met Greg, he said that doesn't have to mean this is your problem. If you go over and talk to them, it could be somebody else you know, whatever.
Hashtag asking for a friend.
Yeah, you're asking. Yeah, I got a friend of a friend. You know, hypothetical situation here. But you also got to understand, and what's said here is so transferable to what you are involved in. And I will say this, in terms of, in my own personal experience, one who's my spiritual mentor and sponsor, even today after 21 years, found out what I was involved in. He said, your whole family's sick. Your whole family. And we've said that before. What does addiction do? It destroys you and everybody else around you, and will take everything that we have. And one of the challenges that we have, and as we work with other people, it's this. I love the dump truck thing. You know, oh gosh, boy, I'm free, and you expect everybody to go, oh great, you are, and you guys may, but the person you're with, they may not, and they may walk out, and they may not, but we've got to learn through in Christ to be okay. But
And can I say something to that too? We need people who can be, yeah, that's great.
yes,
Right?
yes.
We need people who can be our champions and our supporters when we're getting better, because the people that are the most important are the ones that can't give that to us for a while, right? Because they've got to heal and they've got to be angry. And so if we're only looking to the one that we've betrayed, like I sang in that song, then I'm not allowing myself to get the kind of support that I need. So we need both.
Yeah, and in closing out, I kind of what I wanted to say, and I believe this is so true, and I believe this is so true in our walk with Christ. Even people that are not involved in addiction, if they're into a relationship, young couples, I've told them this, you, talking to the guy, you need to be a disciple of Christ. You need to be discipled by someone who is a disciple of Christ. Your wife or your fiance needs to be discipled by a disciple of Christ. Then you both need to be discipled as one unit. And I would say that it works the same way in addiction. It really does. If I know Karen works with couples. There's a lot of y'all work with couples and are in families or just with your kids. And guys, we're all broken. I love that. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, Same Kind of Different as Me. Have you ever seen that movie? I mean, it's awesome. And he said, whether we're rich or poor or somewhere in between, we're all just looking for a way home, right? No, that's all we're all. We're always just looking for a way home. We're always looking for a way back. So let's give Greg and Stacy a hand, and I appreciate it. Appreciate y'all sharing tonight. We're going to close it a different. They're going to be over here at the table in a few moments, and we're going to